Jones. I'm a Heber Springs High School cheerleader. Who all? Captain Cook asked Mrs. Popper, who had come in quietly that none of them had heard her. Why, the penguin, Mrs. Popper. I was just saying, he went on, as Mrs. Popper sat down suddenly on the floor to recover from her sudden surprise, that we named him after Captain Cook. He was a famous English explorer who lived about the time of the American Revolution. He sailed all over where no one had been before. He didn't actually get to the South Pole, of course, but he made a lot of important scientific discoveries about the Arctic regions. He was a brave man and a kind leader, so I think Captain Cook should be a very suitable name for our penguin here. Well, I never, said Mrs. Popper. Bork, said Captain Cork, suddenly getting lively again. With a flap of his flippers, he jumped from the tub to the washstand and stood there for a minute, surveying the floor. Then he jumped down, walked over to Mrs. Popper, and began to peck at her ankle. Stop him, Papa, Mrs. Popper screamed, retreating into the hall with Captain Cook after her, Mr. Popper and the children following. In the living room she paused. So did Captain Cook, for he was delighted with the room. Now a penguin may look very strange in a living room, but a living room looks very strange to a penguin. Even Mrs. Popper had to smile as they watched Captain Cook with light of curiosity in his excited circular eyes, and the black of his tailcoat dragging pompously behind his little pinkish feet, strut from one upholstered chair to another, pecking at each to see what it was made of. Then he suddenly turned and marched into the kitchen. Maybe he's hungry, said Janey. Captain Cook immediately marched up to the refrigerator. Fork? He inquired, turning to aslant his head wisely at Mrs. Popper and looking at her pleadingly with his right eye. He certainly is cute, she said. I guess I'll have to forgive him for biting my ankle. He probably did it out of curiosity. Anyway, he's a clean-looking bird. Fork? Repeated the penguin, nibbling at the metal handle of the refrigerator door at his upstretched beak. Mrs. Popper opened the door for him, and Captain Cook stood very highly and leaned his sleek black head back so he could see what's inside. Now that Mr. Popper's work was over for the winter, the icebox was not quite as full as usual, but the penguin did not know what to eat. What do you suppose he likes to eat? Asked Mrs. Popper. Let's see, said Mr. Popper as he removed all the food and set it on the kitchen table. Now then, Captain Cook, take a look. The penguin jumped onto a chair and then from there onto the edge of a table, flapping his flippers again to recover his balance. Then he walked solemnly around the table and between the dishes of food, inspecting everything with great interest. Then he touched nothing. Finally he stood, very erect, raised his beak to point at the ceiling, and made a loud, almost purring sound. Or, he trilled. That's a penguin's way of saying it is pleased, said Mr. Popper, who had read about it in his Antarctic books. Apparently, however, what Captain Cook wanted to show was he was pleased with their kindness rather than with their food. For now, to their surprise, he jumped down and walked into the dining room. I know, said Mr. Popper. We ought to have some seafood for him, canned shrimp or something. Or maybe he isn't hungry yet. I read that penguins can go for months without food. Mama, Papa, called Bill, come see what Captain Cook has done. Captain Cook had done it all right. He discovered a bowl of goldfish in the dining room window sill. By the time Mr. Popper reached over to lift him away, he had already swallowed the last of the goldfish. Bad, bad penguin, reproved Mrs. Popper, glaring down at Captain Cook. Captain Cook squatted guiltily on the carpet and tried to make himself look small. He knows he's done wrong, said Mr. Popper. Isn't he smart? Maybe we can train him, says Mrs. Popper. Bad, naughty Captain, she said to the penguin in a loud voice. Bad to eat the goldfish, and she spanked him on his round black head. Before she could do that again, Captain Cook hastily waddled out to the kitchen. There, the Poppers found him trying to hide the still open refrigerator. He was squatting under the ice block cube coils under which he could barely squeeze sitting down. His round, white, circled eyes looked out at them mysteriously from the dimness of inside the box. I think that's about the right temperature for him, at that, said Mrs. Popper. We could let him sleep there that night. But where will we put the food? Said Mrs. Popper. Oh, I guess we can get another ice box for the food, said Mr. Popper. Look, said Jamie, he's gone to sleep. Mr. Popper turned the cold control switch to its coldest so that Captain Cook could sleep more comfortably. Then he left the door ajar so that the penguin would have plenty of fresh air to breathe. Tomorrow I will have the icebox service department send a man out to bore some holes in the door for him, for air, he said, and then he can put a handle on the inside of the door so that Captain Cook can go in and out of his refrigerator as he pleases. Well, dear me, I never thought we would have a penguin for a pet, said Mrs. Popper. Still, he behaves pretty well, on the whole, and he is so nice and clean. Perhaps he will be a good example to you and the children. And now, I declare, we must get busy. We haven't done anything but watch that bird. Papa, will you help me set to the beans on the table? Just a minute, answered Mr. Popper. I happen to think that Captain Cook will not feel right on the floor of that icebox. Penguins make their nest on pebbles and stone. So I will just take some ice cubes out of the tray and put them under him. That way he will be more comfortable.